try that again now that we're recording. I'll call the meeting to order. Thank you all for being here. Grateful to see community members. Thank you to fellow committee members for being here. I am hopeful that this afternoon will be an equally productive conversation compared to our last gathering, which I still feel good about. And as I was just sharing, since Hans was the original author of this, I think he did a fine job of capturing what we talked about. So Hans, I'll just share my screen and then have you walk us through if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right, can everybody see this at this time? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that one's not terribly sexy. Let's move to this one.
So yeah, I mean, it always helps to level set what it is that we're trying to solve.
Join the meeting.
And so obviously this is a description of what it was. The objectives were to, I think, twofold: to try to slow down new student enrollment and to allow for a heightened age in place indicator. There were concerns, obviously, that we were seeing a lot of seniors leaving Decatur.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, the study that the schools ran after the exemption was put in place put to rest any perspective that the exemption had actually worked. There was no change, not like there was a little bit of change. There was no change in the rate of seniors leaving the city of Decatur, and there was no real slowdown in the number of new CSD enrollments after the exemption went into place. And so, given the objective of the exemption, it's clear in the data that it didn't actually work as intended. Oh, here, Paula, I'm trying to push to go forward. I think I have to have you do it. That's
actually very funny. There you go. Sorry.
On top of that, there were some unanticipated additional costs of the exemption. All right. So if you take a look at what the cost of the previous exemptions were and grow those, because they grew over time. If you grow those from the 2016 numbers to the 2019 numbers, the schools would have anticipated about $3.1 million in the previous groupings of senior homestead exemptions for the schools. On top of that, based on the calculation that we saw in the sheet that was shared by the schools, there was just a little bit under $1.2 million of anticipated incremental costs with the new exemption. Instead, there was actually about $3.1 million of incremental costs. And so the exemption actually costs the schools $1.9 million extra dollars in 2019 alone, right? And so cumulative over the years since the exemption is in place, it's closing in, or it was closing in 2019 on about $6 million. It'll be closer to $8 million with 2020 factored in. And so that, that is, a shocking number over the last couple of years. Now, what I want to put forward to the group, we actually talked about what sort of cuts CSD made to actually cover that unanticipated cost of the exemption. But in fact, CSD didn't really make cuts, right? The 2020 millage change, which is about an impact of $3.1 million, was done to cover this difference. And so while it's difficult, go ahead.
I was talking about cuts, though. CSD did make cuts in the years between 2016 and 2019. And I don't know that they were specifically tied to the revenue losses from the homestead exemption, but I know that in the lower elementary schools, they cut Spanish from 4 days to 3 days, and they also cut paras. So again, I don't know that that connection has been officially made, but they did make some cuts.
Yeah, and so I think it's worth, I mean, it's very difficult to tie the numbers together in that way, right? So the school makes a budget, and the budget then sets the millage. This is, I know you know this, Gwen, so I'm kind of like repeating this for everyone. So but the school sets a budget, and that budget then forces what the millage will be to cover that budget. And so, yeah, it's not a direct link between cuts and covering the unanticipated incremental gap here versus actually increasing the millage. But it's safe to say all of those factors all play in together. Now, I don't know, James, if you can provide numbers on what the savings were that Gwen described, but if there are cuts that were made in popular programs, and those cuts were made in order to reduce expenses, then it should be captured here without question, right? Because that the whole reason why you were trying to reduce expenses in this period of time was to avoid having to have a very large millage increase in these years.
And I can remember, and I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I remember, I think it was in 2000, it's either 2017 or 2018, when I spoke at a board meeting about the proposed budget, noting that at that point in time, they were having to dip into surplus to balance the budget. And it may have been 2018.
Phil,
but
copy.
Join the meeting.
that it was after the exemption passed. And it was right around the time really that they started first examining the actual impact of the homestead exemption.
To answer your question, I'll figure out I'll get an answer to you there. Because you are correct, getting into the micro, when a school by school decision like paras versus dipping into the surplus, I think is obviously a far more macro thing that can be inserted there.
Well, and it's clear that a combination of cuts, millage increases, and surplus use are all in combination with covering for revenue that isn't coming in through the tax digest, in part because you have this in place. Now, I need to go back and take a look, Gwen, because I ran some analysis in those years as well. And I think I anticipated in 2017 that the schools would be dipping into their surplus in 2018. And I have to go back and take a look because there was something that had happened. And I can't recall exactly what, but it's without a doubt the exemptions didn't help, right? Like, I mean, that's $2 million that the schools could have used this particular year that weren't there.
And I just mentioned it to caution because it sounded like you were saying that there weren't actual cuts because of it, but the result wasn't cuts, but the result was the millage increase. But I think the result was probably both.
A combination of all the above. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
that's fairly said. And I think that actually is a better way to describe it. Rather than saying this forced CSD specifically to make cuts, it forced CSD to reevaluate operations and make a series of cuts, change the millage, and touch the surplus. All right. And that's probably a more accurate description of what happened. So this is the only slide that actually has a graph with data and numbers, and I know some people hate graphs and numbers, and so I just want to make sure if this is clear. Like this is really the slide that describes what went wrong and what we're trying to fix, and so I want to make sure that this is really clear. Is it readable? Do you follow the math? Does that explanation that I gave make sense? Because this is really the basis for what we're trying to go after.
I like the graph. One suggestion I might make is to say for the 3.1 million, unless we know that that's an exact number, maybe add in the word estimated or approximate or something.
Yeah, that's good feedback. In fact, all of them really are rounded off and estimated, and the 3.1 million is a calculated number based on projected growth, and so it should be very much so estimated. All right.
Or you could put in like an asterisk at the bottom. Instead of doing what you did there, you could just add a little asterisk somewhere and say, I don't know, numbers or estimates
or you could just write put after exemptions, parentheses, EST period, close parentheses.
Yeah.
Maybe up in the top sentence, impact on the school budget due to senior exemptions, estimated.
Have fun formatting that, Paula. Live. I'll go in and I'll make some of these changes.
All right,
I'll muck around with that.
That's pretty ugly.
Yeah. By the way, school board, can you find a slide format that doesn't take up 80% of the slide with stuff that doesn't allow you to put things on the slide? There's little schools in the corner and this giant title thing. It gives you a third of the slide to actually, anyway, sorry. Not that I'm anticipating a vote on that. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is just straight up what's our charge, right? We have to reduce it by that anticipated incremental amount. It does not mean we reduce it to the 1.2, just to be clear. It means that we're taking it down to the 4.2 or 4.3, which is the 3.1 assumed previous, estimated previous, I'm sorry, plus the 1.2 anticipated, which gives you a 4.3 expected cost of the exemption, which is a $1.9 million less than the current 6.1-ish million, $6.2 million. So just so we're clear, the change in the exemption that we're talking about right now is going to cost seniors in Decatur $1.9 million. I think we decided that the manner in which we would choose to do this would be first and foremost protecting the vulnerable seniors, making sure that we were focused on affordability first and foremost in order of priority of who needs it the most. And then preserving as much as possible, recognizing that maybe there wouldn't be a ton left, but preserving as much as possible what we could for everybody else, and distributing that as fairly as we could to the rest of the senior population. Next slide.
Any questions on that one? No. All right.
Excuse me. So I think what we're recommending as a group is that we create two exemptions. One exemption is basically the current S4 exemption, but we allocate it to 70 plus. The bucket of funds for that is approximately $3.2 million of that 4.2 that we were talking about. That bucket is approximately $3.2 million. All of the benefits, they're going to come over from the 65 to 69 cohort. We'll talk about what that means in a second, but basically we're not going to reduce. Nobody that gets a lot of the benefit in the 65 to 69 is going to move into the 70 age range and end up with less of a benefit. So they're going to get at least what they got before, if not more. And then anything that is left after that cohort gets it, it's going to be distributed amongst all the 70-year-olds and above in Decatur. The good news is, the 1,000 caveats that I don't have all of the data and I haven't been able to precisely model and yada, yada, yada. But that $3.2 million should be enough that the seniors 70 and above either get 100% of the exemption that they currently have, or they get the vast majority of it. I mean, it should be still a very sizable exemption for those that are 70 and above. The second exemption that we're suggesting that we make is to cover the individuals in the ages 65 to 69 that are at risk. So if you go back and you look at the original exemptions that were there before the S4, they were all about, like relatively small dollar amounts, and they were for low income or lower home value. What we're suggesting that we do is that we recreate that, but in a modern version of the exemption where we actually take real home values instead of like the $10,000 and $20,000 values that were there before. We take 2020 estimated home values and provide a substantive exemption for those people 65 to 69 based on home value. That home value will need to be adjusted annually by either the area median income or the median family income, whatever the right metric is there. And it's tied, I'm sorry, I said home value. It's income capped, not home value. Income capped with an annual adjustment based upon regional incomes. And that exemption value, right, which used to be $10,000, needs to be adjusted for modern home values. And then that also will need to be adjusted according to an index going forward. I honestly don't think I could have explained that worse. So if anybody has any questions about that, please feel free. I don't think I understood what I said. So let me leave that for a second and folks ask some questions, please. Does silence mean that I was clearer than I thought?
Well,
great.
You want me to try and then see if you can correct me? Seems like
Go
a
for
smart
it.
way to go about it, right?
Since you're going to be the one telling the board this, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and then Gwen can come correct me later too. I mean, I think 70 plus makes sense. If we can correctly estimate it at 3.2 million, it models the current one. The 65 to 69 is currently preserved, right? We think that the residents will be able to maintain that, and it'll be close to the 100% reduction. I think the question that's raised in my mind is you left a lot of, I guess, gray area for me on how it would be
Join the meeting.
How it would be written to, cap it where it gets to all versus not, like is it a dollar value? But other than that, I think that part of it is incredibly clear. The 65 to 69, it's federally income capped. And as we had talked before, the charges to the school board to figure out what that federal income cap is, but it should be adjusted based on, a more up-to-date, regionally appropriate 65 to 69 adjusted gross income, so that those who are most vulnerable will be able to cover their taxes and receive relief for that. And then it would also include a home value as well, right? That reflects the adjusted, because when we were looking at the previous one, it was closer to what, $10,000 in home value, which made a little bit of sense in the 1980s, but doesn't make sense in 2020 home value time.
Yep.
So is that accurate?
And that home value will also have an adjustment index going forward, so we don't get stuck 35 years from now with another not correct exemption level.
At that point, we would ask for another 5-year sunset, right?
Correct.
So that's a great add. I think both of these have sunset options built into them. I mean, I just think that we have to be able to reevaluate every couple of years on both of these.
So I would recommend including that as a bullet point. I know you're dealing with the font you're dealing with on here, but if it's possible to include that as a bullet point so it doesn't get forgotten,
yep,
that would be good.
You may actually, Paul, if you just want to make a note up at the top, after that bolded exemptions on the top sentence there,
yeah,
I'll just, put in parentheses Hans to adjust to include 5-year sunset.
So much for that.
Gwen?
Yes,
Gwen,
sir.
Bill Floyd? Gwen?
Yes.
Is it not legal to pass this and have some local requirement without having to go back to the legislature to do this every 5 years? I mean, I know when Lewis was on here one night, several meetings ago, or maybe he and I talked in a phone conversation about doing this some way where it allowed the school board and the city commission to make some changes, or the voters in the city to make some changes without having to go back to the legislature every time and pass another bill. Is that just not constitutional?
I don't know. That's a good question. I've never seen it done that way, but let me check. I can pull out my book.
It's a good question, right? I mean, to the extent that there's local control over it, it's less of a hullabaloo every 5 years.
And that might be
I
a
mean, the more
question
you
for
can leave those
legislative.
guys out.
Sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
Well, the more you can leave those guys out of it, the better off you'll be in the long run.
But yeah, and I agree with you, but yeah, it might be a question for legislative council. So it might be something that I still think it'd be good to include maybe include the note of 5-year sunset, or explore option of revising locally after 5 years. And I wonder if you could work into the legislation something that allowed for that. I don't know
Well, I
if the
think it would be
legislature
obvious
would.
that you wanted to have some sort of procedure. Well, they may not, and that's probably as likely as anything. But although I mean, if they could get out of this mix, I mean, I would think if I were down there and I got an opportunity to get out of it altogether, I would get out of it rather than getting involved in some local fight. Although they at times seem to enjoy that, but I would just, I would make them change it. If it's legal, I would make them change it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll look into that. Not that I can give legal advice to the board, but I mean, I can certainly look at it and think of how that might be able to be structured. Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful that Senator Parent thought to add the 5-year sunset back in 2016.
I mean, it's worth noting that these numbers projected forward this is exemption value is going to grow over the next 5 years. And if it was in place permanently, it would grow in that manner as well. And so it does need to be able to be reevaluated every couple of years. This certainly does not want to be locked. We don't want to have this locked in place. And you know, for some reason, create a millage burden that we didn't anticipate.
You can always change it, can't you, Gwen? I think there's a philosophical argument about whether if it's got a 5-year sunset, then it goes away. But if it's a 5-year, if it's not a 5-year sunset, and then you can always change it, but you have to go through the same process. So I guess it's a little philosophical as to whether you want to make the school board and the city commission be responsible for changing it, as just making it go away. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a philosophical discussion.
I mean, I think it's kind of
For another
easier.
time. I'm sorry.
I think it's easier to ensure that we have these discussions and go back and revisit the numbers when we do have a sunset. You're right. We could be doing this anyway, even if there weren't a sunset. But the sunset, I think, provides a little bit of political impetus to get something, to do something different that might be harder to do otherwise. And Otherwise, it might be harder to get something, well, one, through the legislature, but two, back in front of the voters for some kind of consideration. I like your idea. If there's a way
Well,
to
and,
do it locally, that would be great.
well, that makes obvious sense. And if you look at the other places that are doing something like this, Cobb County, and they've had that one up there. I know they say it costs their school board $52 million a year or $55 million a year. And they're scared to death to go back to try to change that or adjust that in any way. And it's just impossible to do. So, but I would think if there's a way that you can look at it, and you can look at it every year as far as that goes, or every 2 years, not necessarily 5 years, that there's some sort of way you can study this and see what it's costing you. Because, I mean, one of the things I think that was made earlier is that it didn't slow down the school population. What they did 5 years ago, yet the school population is kind of leveled off now, if I understand that correctly. Is that not true?
Yeah,
So
we're starting to run out of convertible stock, right? I mean, and so, yeah, I think that we are seeing the school population start to stabilize or grow at a more population-based rate as opposed to the double digits that it was doing for a couple of years.
Can I ask a question about does when you have a sunset clause, does that mean that you have to start all over again in 5 years? Or do you have the opportunity and I'll just say, we can do a sunset clause, but also have the option to tweak it? I don't know if you say sunset clause, if that automatically means that the state has to get involved, or if we can do it ourselves, to the point of
no, sunset
needs to be done. Because this is like a huge deal here.
It goes away. A sunset clause means that it goes away, it stops.
Okay.
Which is what this one has, is that at the end of 2021, if we don't do anything, it goes away. There's no exemption at all. So you have to start the whole process over again, which means that the school board has to request, the city commission has to request it, the legislature has to pass the bill,
right?
Governor has to sign the bill, and the voters have to pass it. All of that has to happen.
So is there any in between that we could find where, because this is obviously a bigger situation, we are proposing to create two, right? To actually add one. So I would fully understand there being probably some additional steps for that. But to put something on this that would allow us to adjust, I don't know how many options state, and Gwen, I don't know if you would know or anyone would know of other places that just have like literally a dial on it where they can dial it back or forth without having to have, as I believe Hans said, the hullabaloo. If there is a middle ground we could come to where we don't have to do such a big dance every year.
Well, I mean, I think that's what Gwen was going to look into and see if that's a possibility. I think we're all, I certainly, it sounds like you are, I'm certainly in agreement with Mayor that it would be much more preferable for some of that control to be local, so that if we are doing those tweaks, you're not going to the assembly and not doing a whole, putting it on ballots, et cetera, et cetera. So I think
if there is any other terminology other than sunset clause we should use to where we would have that kind of control over it.
Yeah, I think I'll try to adjust the language to reflect that, but until we have at least some clarity on whether that's even an option,
we have what we have.
Yeah, we do. So let's take just a second. I want to make sure, James, you're aware here, because the dollar amounts that we're putting forward are, I need to talk a little bit about the limitations of this analysis, right? So based on the best read of the data that we currently have, this is built upon the assumption that a little bit over half of the senior population is age 70 and above, and a little less than half is in that 65 to 69 age range. the way that calculation was built was based upon the ratio of the number of seniors that were getting the 65 and above exemption versus the seniors that were taking the 70 and above exemption. But we know that is flawed because not all of the seniors were taking the exemption. I mean, part of the problem that we're seeing here is that as soon as this very, very generous exemption came out, you got a ton more folks to sign up for it. Now, population distribution and demographics would imply that that ratio would probably still roughly hold going forward, but there's no assurity of that. And so a part of this analysis that we're going to be recommending is that the school board needs to do a really proper demographic deep dive and run those estimates, right? So the 3.2 million versus the 1.1 million is based upon a rough estimate of the distribution of that senior population. But that may need to be tweaked as you guys have more sophisticated data come in on population and the distribution thereof. Does that make sense? It's really directed at you, James. So I want to make sure.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great. Sorry, I was responding but muted. Classic.
And then the same holds true when we talk about that federal income cap. Whatever. So if it's 1.1 or if it's 1.2, it's not the ratio of the 1.1 to the 3.2 is going to change potentially a little bit, not enormously, because I don't think we're terribly off, but it may adjust a little bit. What will drive that federal income cap is the amount of money that you have in that bucket. So if it is $1.1 million, then you're going to give as much of that 1.1 million away as you can through that cap. Does that make sense? Right. So we're not going to actually pull these levers perfectly for you since we don't have all of the data in front of us. What we are going to do is give you a rubric by which whoever you hire to do this analysis, and I think we're all going to recommend here that you actually properly hire someone to do the detailed analysis. It's always good to have somebody's throat to choke when you're talking about numbers like this. They're going to run the analysis and end up with the final detailed ratios, if that makes sense.
Yep, of course.
And then, Paul, I think slide 6, so once that analysis is run,
right,
this should be updated with a couple of slides saying, if you're age 65 and you're in a home of this value and this is your income, this would be what your exemption looks like. If you're age 73, this is what your exemption looks like, right? You should give some layouts here of what this would look like to citizens that are going to be concerned about what they're going to see. And I hope I'm not speaking for everybody or maybe I am speaking for everybody when I say this, but the philosophy behind the breakout of those two exemptions is for the people who were here when this exemption originally passed. They should all be in that 70 and above group now going forward. So the people that got this very rich benefit in the first place shouldn't actually see that much change with this. We are hoping that 70 plus exemption is still, for all practical purposes, 100%. Where right, you'll feel the change is in the 65 to 69 age range. And a large percentage of the people that are in that bucket are going to lose it. It's mostly going to be preserved only for disadvantaged individuals in that group. Now the hope is obviously, you never like to take away a benefit from somebody, but in this case, we're taking it away temporarily. That when you age into the 70 and above, you'll end up getting that full benefit back. And so hopefully that takes the sting out a little bit on this.
Right.
Are there any other questions or comments on it? Paula, do you have his email with some of his questions? I don't.
Yeah.
I'm going back to try to find it right now.
No, I'm happy.
Bill's on.
I was driving at first, but now I've reached my home destination, so I've been listening.
Hi, Phil.
Hey,
Yeah.
hello everyone.
So
Yeah,
Phil,
so-
I have your email up, but I would much rather you ask your questions than me ask your questions.
Well, in fact, I just had it up myself. Let me
Okay.
let me grab it. In fact, Paul, do me a favor, just read it from your list, and it'll be a little easier for me if you can just.
How about if I just throw it into the window over here? Can we see this
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, that's helpful.
All right, so your first big one was, how was it determined that the exemption failed to maintain the senior population and slow student population growth? And I think that's the Georgia State study. I can't tell you compared to what other indicators.
So yeah, there were a couple things that they did in that study, right? So they looked at the rate at which seniors age 65 and above were moving out of Decatur, selling their home and moving out of Decatur. And they had some ways of determining whether they were selling their home and just moving to a smaller, like a townhouse or something smaller in Decatur versus actually leaving the area. They did that for Decatur because we were, effectively we were the test, right? We had seniors that got an exemption and then left. They looked at a number of other municipalities in the Atlanta area where you had similar income, similar senior demographic, similar home values, a host of things like that. Midtown and Virginia Highlands, and there were a couple of other places that they looked where they didn't get a senior exemption. So the seniors in those locations had no benefit to staying in terms of an exemption. And it turned out that Decatur seniors were moving out of Decatur at exactly the same rate. I mean, it was shocking how tight the data was tied, but the seniors were moving out of Decatur even though they had an exemption at the exact same rate that seniors were moving out of some of these other areas where they didn't have an exemption. And if you stop and you think about it, it makes a little bit of sense, right? I mean, a senior that has a home that has more or less doubled in value, right? I think the average increase in value, you had homes that went from $350,000 to $650,000 to $700,000. So that's an increase in equity, not to count how much they may have paid against their mortgage in that time frame. But so you have a group of seniors that are sitting on legitimately closing in on $500,000 of equity in their home just from the increase in home value alone. And they're comparing $500,000 of cash in their pocket against, a couple $1,000s worth of home exemption, right? Like it's just the math on the exemption isn't enough to offset, a senior that wants to live in Decatur and isn't motivated by money to leave isn't going to be influenced by an exemption. A senior that would be influenced by a couple $1,000s exemption is going to take a look at $500,000 of equity in their home and say, well, I'm going to go with the $500,000 equity in my home. And so you saw that play out, and it just had no impact in the rate of seniors moving out. And they looked at it, I think, at the rate that seniors were moving out prior to the exemption as well, and just really didn't see a big change there. And so it's pretty comfortably sure in the data that the exemption did not have an impact on seniors leaving Decatur. Unfortunately, because I think we wanted to see it happen, but did not.
Okay, down to the next question. Wasn't the exemption created to reduce the housing cost burden on seniors 65 and older? Did it fail to do that?
Well, so I mean, the objective obviously was to reduce the housing cost burden so that they would stay. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, thousands of dollars worth of senior home exemption is going to reduce housing cost burden, but that did not translate into so that they would stay.
Okay. I guess what I'm doing now is sort of thinking about what a member of the audience might think and say. And that one really gets to me because it kind of goes back to the scenario where you were saying some folks in that 65 to 69 will see a difference, and then they might see the benefit when they get to 70. But I'm really concerned about those seniors who, because of the hardship in the 65, 69 loss, they might not be able to sustain those costs that gets them to 70. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So
Yes.
how would we respond to that concern?
Well, that is the reason why instead of moving all of it into the 70 and above bucket, we are going to ensure that we use a properly adjusted home value for 2020, and that we allocate at least 25% or a little bit over of the amount of funds that we have to the 65 to 69 bucket, specifically for the individuals where affordability is a problem, right? And I think it's important to draw a distinction between two groups of seniors in that 65 to 69 bucket. There are clearly seniors in Decatur that can afford their taxes, right?
Sure.
And that we gave them this enormous benefit anyway, and that's great. I mean, we wish we really could keep it in place, but we can't. There is a group of seniors that can absolutely afford it. We're going to take the benefit back away from them. Unfortunately, there's no way to sugarcoat that. If you can afford to pay your home taxes and you're between the ages of 65 and 69, you're going to for the schools. We are going to reserve that $1.1 million specifically for those that will potentially have or definitely have a problem affording their taxes and stay focused on that. Now, when everybody gets above 70, different story entirely. But the objective in that 65 to 69 is to hold that money aside specifically to preserve the benefit for those that are you're going to have trouble affording it, to your point.
And is there, like, how will they know that they're entitled to, that benefit? Let's say if I'm sort of putting myself in the position of being in that age group, having a challenge, kind of feeling stuck, but if I don't know that there's some way to get around it, and I'm speaking specifically about knowing a process, knowing what to do, have we thought about making it known and giving some sense of what to do if you're having a challenge, and if you qualify, you would get the benefit? Is that getting too granular at this point, or is that going to be cared for down the pipe?
No,
I think that's a big problem with a lot of senior-based exemptions, Phil. It's one reason they include home values in a lot of senior-based exemptions, because it gives municipalities a place to look out for. Because you're correct, you may not know whether your income qualifies or not.
Right.
Whereas if your home value, then the city knows to say, hey, the Cuffeys live at a house where they're close to qualifying. Maybe we can send them information about it and let them know. It's certainly a reason my city should reach out to people who are of age to say, listen, if your adjusted gross income is below this and your house is below this, you qualify for these exemptions. You may be entitled to this sort of thing.
But that's great, James. I agree with you. I think a lot of people have missed some of the benefits, and because they don't know, and I don't see any evidence of the city taking a proactive kind of reach out lifeline, here's the information. They just, it may be happening, I don't know, but I just haven't seen any evidence of it. And I think we should really say something to that effect, our recommendations, because it really, I think, could help a lot of people who are in this.
In the past, the Lifelong Communities Board has actually held in-person seminars on tax exemptions and how to apply. And Maria, can you speak to that?
Okay.
Yeah, we did, well, we did the original town hall where we invited people to come and ask questions of Dr. Duty, and then I think Annie Keola was on the board, as well as Peggy Maris was the commissioner at that time. Since then, we were holding third Thursday conversations at various rec center / community rooms in some of the retirement communities around town, so people could learn more about exemptions, because there are several, aside from this one, that we offer, and even that DeKalb County offers, that we know that people don't know about and aren't taking advantage of. So we do those fairly, at least twice a year. We would do third Thursdays. Obviously, they're not happening now.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, Maria.
I would actually
COVID situation, we really need to see something, because some seniors, don't have a laptop or Wi-Fi, and they don't have.
They do not.
They don't know about.
They do not.
They don't know about Zoom, and they don't
Nope.
know about Google Meet. So I think we should speak to that in some kind of way or shape or form, and some kind of recommendation, just so the city at least has that recommendation is something we can follow up on. What are your thoughts?
I think we should go even harder on it. I don't think we're talking about outreach and communication, although I think that's important that we reach out to let people know that these exemptions are there. We have the data. We know who should get it. We should automatically, we should not depend on them to sign up for it. We should sign them up for it if they qualify. Like it's insane that we're expecting people to track all of this, municipal minutia nuance. I mean, there's like 75 different exemptions out there. It's crazy. I think we know, we have the data. The recommendation ought to be, if they qualify, they automatically get signed up for it. It's not us waiting on them. They get added into the rolls to get this exemption. And with the data that we have, we could probably identify 85 or 90% of the people that would qualify. The final 10% are going to find out when their bill shows up and it's, thousands of dollars more than they anticipated. And then they come and say, what the hell's going on? And we fix it then. But I mean, I don't think we wait on people to sign up for this. I think we sign them up for it if we know that they qualify. Does that make sense? Or,
Absolutely.
I think also if we could alleviate those gotcha moments, because that would kind of suck, Hans.
Yep.
Those gotcha moments as much as possible. But I know that, obviously we only have control over things that are happening that are City of Decatur ones. But there are DeKalb County that we have residents that do not know about various exemptions. So the more we can get the old school word out with flyers, posters, and mail, things in the mail, snail mail, the better. So that's my older part of my body speaking. Just traditional forms of communication.
I think there's also a need to have, I don't want there to be gotcha moments either, but I sort of recognize that there are going to be there's just some people are going to fall between the cracks on this. And so we should have a really clean way when those people show up to communicate and to fix, right? They should not have to go through 16 layers of red tape to try to fix it. That's on us. We are the ones that goofed that up. And so we should have a process in place to quickly and simply rectify it when we identify the gotchas.
I mean, technically, people typically do have to apply, but it does seem like, we could at least, or the school district could send a mailer or something to everybody who currently has the exemption, explaining the changes and including an application. And if you qualify for one of these, fill out this application, submit it by, I don't remember what the date is anymore. I think April 1st.
Glenn, I was under the impression that the S4 people automatically were enrolled into that.
That is true. They were. Typically, though, I mean, I think that's unusual. I'm not sure
is it
why that happened that way.
is it not permitted to happen, or is there a mechanism that we have to authorize to let it happen? Because if there is a mechanism, I would, at least personally, I would push for us making use of that same mechanism for the two that we're recommending, and minimally for the two that we're recommending here.
I think with income, it's tricky, because income can change from year to year. And also we're looking at potentially different income qualifiers than are currently in use. And I don't know if normally people have, if under an income-based exemption, if people have to, reapply, or if it's an annual thing, or if it's just if as of the date that you qualify for this exemption, you're qualified forever. I think that's probably something that the lawyers putting this together would need to look into and find out what that application process is. And CSD can probably tell us, because they have some income-based exemptions that are in place right now, or not CSD, but City Educator.
Yep.
Okay, can I move to another question?
Yes, please.
Okay, what did we learn from the first go round, and what are we doing to achieve original objectives?
I think number one, let's hire some proper data analysts and really make a deep dive on this data and get to understand it, so we don't have any more of these unanticipated costs. I think the layout that we have of the exemption, the philosophy behind it, where we preserve it as much as possible for one group, it's now at age 70, but ensure that we still maintain a sufficient amount for affordability for the other group, is reflective of what we've learned in this, right? I mean, we learned that we're not retaining seniors with an exemption, and so focusing on a needs-based assessment and ensuring that those folks are still protected while reserving the maximum amount of what's left for everybody else when they hit that 70 age is what's reflective of what we've learned, if that makes sense.
Okay, and you may have touched on this, but in slide 3, the unexpected additional costs of the new exemption, how did we capture that?
So how did we calculate it, or how did we, what do you mean by
the additional cost? And we calculated sort of like, so calculating is one thing, but sort of explaining it so that the average person understands it is where I'm going at with this question.
Got it. I mean, I could verbally explain it, but I think your question is more, we don't actually explain it in these slides.
Yes.
So let's have a little bit of a conversation about how to do that in a way that's not, necessarily throwing a bunch of people under the bus. But the original $1.2 million took just the population of seniors that were currently getting an exemption, and then calculated what the full value of their entire tax bill would be if that went away. And that was the $1.2 million. What was not done in that calculation was determine whether there were seniors that would then take this new exemption that weren't currently getting the exemption. And it turns out that there's a fair bit of seniors that would do that, especially since they were automatically signed up for it. The other thing that happened is that the millage rate changed, right? So we talked a little bit before about the millage going up from 18.65 to 20.21, I think. I don't know exactly what it is, but that change is substantive as well. And so anytime there's a millage increase, the anticipated amount that you're not collecting is also going to go up. And so what we're trying to do with this, it's not obviously reflected on this slide, but we tried to build the forecast out of what it would look like going forward based on the growth in costs. And we do actually know that $6.2 million is a solid number because we can calculate what the total cost of the S4 exemption is in 2019. And so that's where that came out. I think our very strong recommendation coming out of this around hiring folks to actually run these calculations and to build the data set that CSD will use for doing these allocations is reflective of the fact that we can't afford to do a back of the envelope calculation again. Like more or less, that initial calculation that set us at the 1.2 was a pretty quick and dirty back of the envelope calculation. And it turns out when you do that, you cost the school system $6 to $8 million over a couple of years. And so our recommendation this time is don't do that. Don't do back of the envelope. Let's do the real work to run this calculation correctly.
And if I may add, just to put a fine point on this one, there was an 18% jump in the number of seniors who landed in the S4 that had not been taking an exemption before. And so the fact that 18% is a huge jump. And by 2019, that was almost up to 30% compared to where it was in 2016. So that's a lot of folks to be added into something, and it had a major impact.
Okay.
I want to add, since we're looking at this slide again, I was just thinking about, we're talking a lot about the seniors, and of course, there are certainly policy interests for giving seniors tax breaks, and we've talked about a lot of them. We always kind of say there's no such thing as a tax cut. There's always it's a tax shift, and what the millage rate increase, it really demonstrates the tax shift here. The taxes went down for seniors, and so everybody else who is still paying taxes to CSD has to pay more taxes, really, to make up for that, as we were talking about earlier. And our seniors are not the only vulnerable population in the city. And there's so much conversation about keeping Decatur affordable, so that we can maintain diversity, including economic diversity in the city. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing. So I think that's another thing to consider, that we've increased taxes on people who are not seniors as a result of this. And how is that impacting some of our other vulnerable populations who are not eligible for the senior homestead exemption?
That's a very good point, Glenn. Something that hopefully some part of this effort is taken into consideration on a sort of a macro level of all the taxes that are being collected and across all the groups and the other exemptions. And if we have the data that I guess drills down to that level of socioeconomic standing, that would be most helpful to look at it from that standpoint. Do we know if we have it to that level?
Well, we do have fairly good visibility into the individuals that are taking needs-based exemptions already, right? Income gated, and not necessarily just for the schools, but even the homes that are taking exemptions for the city of Decatur. And so, yeah, we do more or less know which addresses and which homes are needs-based. And well, obviously, the analysis that I ran here, it was all focused at 65 and above, or in some cases 62 and above. But where those exemptions exist for the rest of the population, that data also exists. We're able to use that.
Okay, a couple other questions here I think we've covered. But if we can look at slide 4, and I think the question was, does the first bullet point objective conflict with the second and third? So the first bullet point is to reduce senior homestead tax exemptions, and then protect the disadvantaged and preserve as much tax relief.
I think the best way to read this is First bullet is fixed. We're going to reduce it by 1.9. Second bullet is fixed. We're going to preserve the exemption as much as, we're going to preserve the, good Lord, Hans. We're going to protect the vulnerable seniors that need that protection. And the third bullet is the one that's highly variable. Whatever is left of the money can get distributed to the rest of the seniors. And that's trying to get to the point that you were making earlier, Phil, or I'm sorry, also that Gwen was making as well, where, look, it probably isn't right. It's a tough sell to say seniors that can really afford these exemptions should get it. And then the result of that is that individuals that aren't senior but can't afford taxes in Decatur have even higher taxes placed upon them. We're instead looking at this as, we're going to take these costs out. We're going to protect the vulnerable with them. What's left after that's been done can go to the remaining seniors. And it's not it's not a terrible story, because it still does look like the majority of this exemption can be preserved for those that are 70 and above, with all of the caveats that I said earlier about the quality of the data.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Okay, let's see, and then the slide, how will home exemption values be determined and measured over time? I think we may have talked about this. How will home exemption values be determined and measured over time?
Well, that actually, if I could talk about that, Phil, for a second, it's a really good question, because we aren't answering that here, really, right? I mean, so we have these exemptions where we're talking about $10,000 or $20,000 that were set in 1985 or 83, whenever those were put in place. And they weren't ever grown over time, right? And so the question is, how do you take the $10,000 from 1983 and adjust it for 2020? Well, it's not consumer price index. That inflationary measure is nowhere near sufficient to capture the growth of homes. Do you take mean home value change in that time frame? Like, I'm not going to be a real estate or, economics expert to be able to put the right number there. But there are people that do, and we should seek their counsel on what the right way is to calculate that. And then what the right way is to calculate that going forward, so we don't end up again 35 years later with incorrect home values.
Have we turned that to a recommendation that says they need to address it? Is that captured somewhere?
So, sorry, say that again, Phil.
This thing about the home exemption values and measured over time, what they are, and the fact that they shouldn't become antiquated, obsolete. They should move with the times. Should we capture that in some kind of recommendation for the board to care for?
Does it not?
Is it here somewhere?
Yeah, the last bullet under 65 to 69 says assign an exemption value that reflects current home values and then adjusted going forward.
Okay.
Now, granted, the grammar on that is all jacked up, so I'll fix that. But that's the intent of that bullet, was to capture that.
Yeah, and to Phil's general tone, we did spend a good bit of time discussing all of the benefits of federal income versus state income. And I know that there's a Fannie Mae housing index for Decatur and, that sort of stuff. So that is an interesting project, but certainly one worth, like you said, Hans, not ignoring, not just doing what back of the envelope math on. Spending
a few $10,000 worth of proper analysis to save $8 million of loss, I think, is a worthy swap.
Yeah. That takes care of my questions. Thank you, Hans, James, Paula, everyone else weighing on the team. I just appreciate that time and input.
Yeah. Thanks for the questions. They were great.
I really appreciated the email, Phil. It got me to read it and got me reading and thinking at the beginning of the week.
All right. Well, are there any other questions, any other comments on any of the slides?
What is the process from here? Like, what do we do once let's say we get this presentation cleaned up and it's all sorted? Are we presenting this to the board officially at some point? Like, how does what are we doing next, I guess? And how do we know that we can put a pin in our work?
My assumption is that some member of the board would present it at the next school board meeting, which I believe is September 8th, but I don't have that in my calendar, which is shocking.
Next board meeting is September 8th,
Yes.
Thank you.
So
and the committee should be ready to present to the board.
And then
We should present to the board, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. I
And then
nominate you, Paula.
Thanks, Don. I think I've been voluntold for enough on this one so far. And then the report that sort of lays out more than what these slides can do, I assume is also expected in the month of September by the school board.
that would be great. Yes.
All right. Shauna, never mind, I'll look it up. I don't know what time the school board meetings usually are, so, but I'll put that on my calendar. We should all put it on our calendar, frankly, since it'll be virtual also.
Well, that one's at 6:30.
Sorry, they're at 6:30.
Thank you.
Is it like, are we drafting this report, or do we have somebody to take our input and draft it?
You as a committee should draft the report.
That won't be a mess at all.
No, not at all. So who among us would like to raise their hand to at least develop an outline for that report? Same thing. Okay. All right.
Volunteering, but how different does the report need to be than the PowerPoint? I kind of thought that the PowerPoint was the report.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the PowerPoint does a great job of outlining what that report might look like. So why don't we use the PowerPoint as the outline of the report? I know they're looking for probably more substantive information around that.
You know where I think more substantive information might be helpful, rather than outline, rather than a detailed thing all the way through. I think we probably should seek or get some legal input on how we are able to frame exemptions, and then put a little bit more detail behind the exemptions themselves, the exemption recommendations. Like, what specifically is the analysis that the school board needs to do to answer some of these questions? What are the specific levers that they can pull when they have that data? And then how would the exemptions be structured? And I can answer some of those questions on data, but I'm not entirely clear that we have the expertise. Well, I mean, I don't, Gwen, maybe you, but somebody that can offer a little bit more of a legal framework on how to structure this to help the board as well. I forget what slide it is, but it's the one slide that gives our two recommendations. I think we could probably put a 1 or 2 pager together with a little more detail behind those specifically for the board to act on.
I mean, I can take a stab at those. Again, I'm not at all going to give any legal advice to anything, but I mean, I can, based on the framework that I have seen in other exemptions that have passed the legislature, I can kind of, talk about how they might be able to be structured, subject to legislative council's, suggestions.
If you want to set that up and then shoot it my way, I'm happy to add the kind of the details around what sort of analysis needs to be done.
Yeah, that would be good, because I don't know that.
Just realistically, I do not have tons of time between now and September 8th. Does that have to be done by the 8th, or are we talking about the end of September?
Well, the presentation for the 8th for sure.
Of course. Yeah, that should not be a problem.
And then certainly the before the, I don't know, what's the second school board meeting in the month of September?
Oh,
The
is there
next
one on
meeting
the,
would be October.
Okay. So obviously then that needs to get to the school board before the end of the month, certainly. And I don't really see them having, if we've done a good job with this part, I don't see them having a ton of questions based on the added clarity that we add through a short follow-up report.
Yeah, if the report just includes most of the data and the things that you all have done, I think that's the most important part. You know, Paula, you've done a good bit of work. Hans done work. I see Chris Grimes has joined it. He's done some work. I mean, just having that for members of the board to go through and answer questions, even if it's in a week or two, I think that they will appreciate that. Yeah.
So to me, that sounds like a how did we get here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I am going to say, like, I want to put a little more details forward on the kind of, what I don't want us to do is end up back of the envelope calculation. And so like, I will want to lay out in a little more detail, really the kind of, the kind of analysis. I mean, I'm not going to write an RFP for a data firm, but I mean, like, there is some thoughtful analysis that should be done that is much more detailed than what's on those two slides that I think we should put forward as a part of the recommendation. And if we're going to, should we just kind of virtually circulate to the group? I mean, I don't want to write something and then unelectedly nominate myself to present it on the group's behalf. I think we should certainly circulate it to everyone when that's ready and let everyone kind of weigh in.
I can start a Google Doc for the committee.
Okay, great.
I think that would work beautifully, Shauna. Thank you, because it worked nicely for these slides. So. All right. I have zero. The one thing I did not pull up was the agenda, to be honest. We didn't approve minutes from last time. We didn't do all kinds of things. But since we've apparently been excused from Robert's rules, then does anybody have any comments on the minutes from the last meeting? Did anybody read the minutes from the last meeting? Okay. Just keeping it real. I think Shauna did a fine job with them. It was quite brief. I'm expecting that this one is really where the rubber's hitting the road at this point with the slides and with the report, and then community engagement. I do think we have to talk a little bit about that, of ideas on how to do that, making sure that we reach people, as we've already spoken earlier, reach people who don't necessarily have regular access to internet and such. James, you're muted, and I love you for that, but.
I just do a sigh for people without internet right now. And I know that those seniors exist, and that's something that Mayor Wilson and I talked about.
Okay. Well, I guess the good news is we actually have their addresses. We have their name and address. It's not like, it's not like it's a complete Pokemon hunt, but I would think at a minimum, some form of communication, even if it's just a letter, it's something to keep them informed, something to keep them in the loop, so that they, again, don't get blindsided. People have some clue that this is being worked on, and that there's the next set of analysis will be done by somebody that CSD chooses.
Can we leverage some of the city boards and groups that engage with seniors to help with some of this communication? I mean, I would think that we would want as many different vectors of outreach as possible.
I don't see Maria still with us. She would be the direct connect to I mean, there's plenty of connections to the lifelong group, but
You know,
That-
active living, like there's there's groups that we should be using on the city side that you know, the Beacon Hill Alliance. I know there's a half a dozen or probably a dozen groups that should be participating in that outreach.
Agreed.
the Better Together Advisory Board actually has an asset map of the city of
Oh, yeah, that's great.
all manner of groups that reach different populations, as well as faith-based and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's public. It's out on the city's website. And if you have any trouble finding it, I am more than honored to either send a direct link or pull the thing down and send it to you in an Excel.
Okay.
Lots of ways to do outreach.
It's good to know.
Is our recommendation that we drop that in the school board lap, or is somebody here gonna kind of sum that up? And
Well, the minutes and the notes from last time suggested that we were gonna have the ideas in the presentations, that they were gonna require some more analysis about what our ideas would be, that we would reach out with, this is what we're working on, and begin a process of reaching as many people as possible to say, like, this is what we're working on, this is what we've done. We included and are finalizing a newsletter to the DeKalb delegation. We've reached out to them to say, this is the committee. I wrote up a little blurb. I reached out to Gwen individually. She helped me bullet point it. The communications department, CSD included it. That wasn't the only thing that they included, but included some other stuff as well. Just said, you know, this is the process. Because, I mean, you all are obviously step one, and I appreciate what you've done. And COVID kind of, this is not the way we envisioned it. I would have liked the public to have been more involved leading up to this, but that hasn't been the reality. So I think we're going to do a little bit more moving forward. And so I'm okay with that, and reaching out to these groups, figuring out if it's Zoom calls plus letters plus information about step 2, step 3.
And we mustn't forget about Elizabeth Brown's, I'm losing it now. I am calling her the wrong name, and I cannot believe I'm doing that. Elizabeth Wilson, thank you. I had another person in my mind at that moment. Her magic phone tree. My goodness, they have, that thing will put you to shame. It put the internet to shame. It's pretty amazing. So she has quite the phone list, and they all know who to call, and that thing just spreads like wildfire. So
Okay.
I don't know if she's offered that to you or not, but when we did this original Yes to 5 campaign years ago, which included saying yes to the bond referendum and right? Anytime we needed something and we needed to reach communities that weren't easy to reach, that was the conduit, and she's still pretty amazing at it. So.
Okay.
Gwen, you look like you want to say something. I'm just not sure.
No, it's totally unrelated, but I always had the census on my mind when we're talking about getting messages out to people, because that deadline's the end of September also.
Okay. Does anybody
Totally
have
unrelated to this committee? I just made me think about it.
No, it's all interconnected one way or another. So does anybody have any, I haven't asked Andrea lately how the city is doing. I know the commissioners took on a kind of commissioner to commissioner challenge for getting the census numbers up, but the participation up, but I don't know where we stand. Okay.
I don't know either.
I don't know where we stand, but I did hear or read that overall the census participation rate as of about 2 to 4 weeks ago was at about 60%, when the announcement was made that the follow-up door-to-door effort would be the shortest in history. It's only going to September 30th. And as a result of that, Constance and I were talking about how we could prod our young people, our nephews and nieces, and the young people in the family as to whether they've not only registered for the census, but also if they registered to vote. And as a result of that, I put 2 links together in a text message that could easily go on social media, to reach them. And it ended up turning it into what I call a Take 12 initiative, because it takes about 2 minutes to register to vote online. It takes about 10 minutes to register for the census. And these are just 2 links that you can easily get to. And so Beacon Hill has now adopted the Take 12 initiative. And if you want to share it with the group, I certainly would, appreciate that. Paul, I think I may have sent you the flyer. If I didn't, I will, Paul. I'll send it to you, or I'll do a reply all and send it to the folks on the list.
There you go.
However you want to do it. So you guys will see that. You can pass it on and encourage people to do what they need to do, before these deadlines come up, because it's so very, very important.
That's great, Phil. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah.
Only 12
appreciate
minutes.
that.
I mean, who can't find 12 minutes to take care of those 2 important things? Check those boxes and keep moving.
That's fantastic. And from what I understand, not only are they stopping going door to door on September 30th, but they're stopping even data collection on that date. So it's, it's coming up pretty tight.
And let me just add this, as far as the registration to vote, the link that I discovered is called voteamerica.org. And it's a pretty cool site. As soon as you go to it, a big number comes up and it counts down the number of days to the election. So I think we're at 76 or 75
Join
days.
the meeting.
And then there's a whole menu where you can literally find your nearest polling place, get an application completed for your absentee ballot, which I did do. Previously, if anyone's done the absentee ballot, you have to fill out the actual application and you can email it, which was, a bit of a time saver. But with the Vote America website, all you do is check the box for the application and provide the, name and address. And then all they ask you to do is take a picture of your signature, attach it, and you're done. That completes your requirements. So what they will do is copy you on an email that goes to your voter registration office, and then they'll confirm that their application has been sent, and you're going to get your application ballot completed, and you're going to actually get your absentee ballot sent in the mail, which I thought was really convenient. It saved a whole nother step of me having to fill out the application again for the election, and just by taking a photo of my signature. That's all they need to validate your identity to meet the requirement to get a absentee ballot mailed to your home.
What's that website again?
VoteAmerica.org. You'll see it in the
Sure.
in the document that I'll send
Okay.
out.
Thank you.
All right. VoteAmerica.org. It's a nonprofit.
Okay, I'm going to have to step off soon if we're kind of wrapping up. I don't know if we're close, but do you need anything else from me, Paula, or James, or anyone else?
No, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your efforts and all the hard work that's gone into this.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Anybody, anything further? And I'm sorry, James, I can't unmute Maria. It just won't let me.
It's okay. It's all right. Maria had to call in. Her internet crashed.
Ah, okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Stay safe, stay healthy. Keep all the smiles up you can.
All right.
All
Will
right.
do. Thanks,
Likewise.
Paula.
Take care. Great job.
Thanks, everybody.